To be yourself in a world that is constantly trying to make you something else is the greatest accomplishment. Ralph Waldo Emerson. Recruitamentary. Empowering your employment. Podcast episode series part 1. Alrighty, everybody. Thank you for tuning in to the next episode of the Recruitamentary podcast. This is Michael Midnight here. Today, we have with us, as for our topic being international employment and beyond, is a friend of mine and also fellow podcast host, Ben Cattaneo. Ben, how's it going?
Thanks, Michael. It's going really well. It's a pleasure to be on your podcast. I'm looking forward to this.
Likewise. Well, we did, Ben and I actually did a podcast to sort of preface it a little bit. Ben is a risk management professional. He also has a podcast, All Things Risk, that I was a guest on recently. We started talking about a lot of his international experiences as a student, as an employee, and what he's about. So, Ben, if you want to take a couple, a minute or so or something like that, have the listeners listen in on,
Sure.
Tell a little bit about yourself.
Sure. So I'm a Canadian based in the UK. I actually am an Argentine Canadian based in the UK. So I was born in Argentina, and when I was 4 years old, my family moved to North America. And I've lived and worked all over the world, but for the last several years, I've been based out in the UK. I work in risk management, but I studied international affairs, international relations, and I'm a little bit of I'm not a nomad, but I love living and working in different countries, as you'll hear from me. Yeah, that's me, and we can dive into any aspect of that, Michael. Whatever you think would appeal to your listeners. Absolutely.
Well, he's definitely a nomad, and by easy terms, it just means that he doesn't like sitting still in more than one place too often. So, but in all seriousness, as you've been traveling around, I know there's been probably a lot of different opportunities and cultures and things like that you've been dealing with. Going back and touching on the aspect of your studious times as a student, what were really the biggest headaches that you were going through while you were, an international student, citizen traveler, while you were studying abroad, looking for work, and those types of circumstances?
Sure. Well, I guess I'll preface it. I'll preface it by saying that I always wanted to travel. So having lived or having been born in Argentina, and then having lived in first the US and then in Canada, that sort of international side was always a part of me. And I always knew that there were other parts of the world that are worth exploring and understanding. And so I always wanted to travel. And at the same time, I didn't grow up in a rich household. We were fairly middle class. And so one of the things I really wanted to do is I wanted to have an international career. I didn't know what that meant. I studied international relations. I thought maybe that would help. So I studied international relations in Canada, thoroughly enjoyed the subject matter. But I got to a point where I found that it was quite theoretical, and I wanted to find ways in which I could live and work in other parts of the world. So I wanted to preface that by actually saying, well, it is challenging, but also there are so many wonderful opportunities out there to get some experience and exposure to other parts of the world that aren't that onerous financially. So again, I didn't have loads of cash. We came from a family of effectively of immigrants from Argentina to North America, and my parents kind of started or restarted their lives a little bit later on. And I went on a few exchanges as a student. I guess if anyone who's studying either in high school or in college and university, do check out whatever exchange programs your university has, because there's some great ways where, for example, you might pay tuition in your home school, but then you get to spend a semester or a year somewhere else. And that's a great way to get some exposure, or to spend a summer somewhere else, or something along those lines. So I was able to do that. I chose my university that I went to very carefully. I chose to go to school, the university where I was living. So I didn't have to, my parents, they could have taken out a second mortgage or something to send me to university in some other city, but it just didn't seem to me like that was a very good idea. I stayed, lived at home while I was studying, and that allowed me to do a few things. And so I was able to spend a little bit bit of my time, a few weeks in summers doing some internships and, as I said, some exchanges to France in particular. That gave me a little bit of a taster for what the world is like in one other country for starters. When I graduated, and anyone who's listening to this who's a native English speaker, one of the biggest assets that we have is our language. And we can teach English as a second language in so many countries. And that's what I did. I went to South Korea and I spent a year and a bit doing that back in 1996, 97. And that was just a wonderful experience. And you go and you get some employment, and you get, at the time, you get an apartment paid for, and you get a salary, and just really great for somebody who's just coming out of university. As an experience, some way of getting experience in different parts of the world is fabulous. And one of the things I would say about any type of travel is it's all about experimentation. So you might think that it would be wonderful to, for example, go and live in Spain for 2 years. But if you've never been to Spain, then maybe that's not such a good idea. You might hate it. It's good to take little tasters. So maybe go out for a month, maybe try and find maybe an exchange program, or there are all types of, we were talking about visas. So there are all types of little unknown visas that you can get, student work visas, temporary visas that exist. And when I was growing up, when I was back
in the day when I was your age.
Yeah. But I feel like this, Michael, because the internet was not really a huge thing.
Oh, don't get me started, man. You're going to make me feel old.
Yeah. So we didn't have a huge amount of resource, and there was a big fat book called The Canadian's Guide to Living and Working Overseas. And it had all types of resources and ideas of different things that you can do, different ways that you can get international experience. And that might have been studying, there might have been some scholarship programs, there might have been different visas that you get to go and work in different countries. And it was just a wonderful resource and guidebook that I didn't know how I would have figured some of this stuff out if that book didn't exist. There's all kinds of visas and different work schemes, and I would suggest go and get a little bit of experience somewhere else. You might find an exchange. You might be able to, work as an English teacher in, say, Colombia or something like that if you're interested in Latin America. Give yourself a bit of a taste for what that's like and whether or not you actually like it, because there are all kinds of things that you don't know about a place until you spend some time there. So when I was in South Korea, I got there in the first few months. It looked actually pretty developed in terms of all the buildings were fairly modern. I'd previously spent a bit of time on an exchange program. I spent a couple of months in West Africa, where there's a lot of poverty there, and you can tell when a place is more developed than the other. And I landed in South Korea, and I thought, well, this looks pretty modern, and
this isn't bad.
This isn't bad, and so I took that as a proxy for what the culture was going to be like. The culture is vastly different to what I knew growing up. Right. It can be very hierarchical. There are all kinds of different ways of speaking and addressing people, all kinds of things that you just have to spend some time figuring out. And you really need to spend a huge amount of time in a culture as different from yours as that to really get your head around it. And you might find that challenging, and you won't know unless you spend a bit of time there. So I'd encourage anyone to take those little experiments and get comfortable.
Have your own recruiter or candidate story that you'd like to share with us? If you're listening on YouTube, comment below. Otherwise, feel free to email your experience to ask@recruitamentary.com. You can find our full conversation of this episode on YouTube at youtube.com/recruitamentary. Thanks for checking out this episode, and feel free to like, subscribe, and share the content. A Mike Tech Studios production.